My name's Barnaby Skinner. I lead the data journalism at Tamedia. We're a small team. Matthias Born, who's sitting here, is also on the team. Simon Luqueta, who's currently lead program at Columbia University in the States, is on the team. And as Mr. Pietro Supino mentioned before, in August, we have hired a data scientist who will be on the editorial team. So it's exciting times. Thanks a lot for the opportunity to talk here at this event. I've been wanting to come to TX for ages, and finally, after 4 years, the fourth event I've made it, and I'm allowed to talk, so thanks a lot. And the talk I would like to give today is as much an invitation as it is a request, and a request as it is a presentation. Just briefly, let's turn the clock back 30 years, 1988. Die Hard was just in the cinemas, and the World Wide Web was very much still a very vague idea in Tim Berners-Lee's mind. And these were the days when the ad department had very little to do with the journalists. And the journalists had very little to do with the guys printing the newspapers, and they had very little to do with the guys selling advertising. You get the picture. Everybody had their own little box. And they were very happy living in this little box. Newspapers were selling lots and lots of subscriptions, but they were still incredibly successful at selling these advertising as well. Today, in 2018, this has changed a lot. Selling advertising has become much more difficult, and the walls have started to crumble, the walls between journalists and the advertising marketeers. And when the advertising marketeers reach out to journalists to ask whether he or she could work on a certain topic, because a client would like him or her to, this means that these walls could collapse very soon. And tearing down these walls is not a good thing. Independent journalism only works when journalists are free to write what they want and to choose the topics they cover, regardless of what advertisers request. So in other words, why should anybody buy specific content that is fundamentally driven by advertisers' cash when this content has actually already been paid for? At the same time, however, we are in the process of building new walls. The connectivity of the World Web, our increasing ability to store and transmit vast amounts of information and data, and the ever-growing speed of processing power to analyze and understand this data has created demands and opportunities for new opportunities for media companies, and created many new jobs. You only have to look at the current Tamedia job listings to understand that. Senior software engineer, data landscape, lead data scientist, digital advertising at Renovero. None of these jobs would have existed 30 years ago. But between these jobs and traditional journalism, we seem to have created new walls, and at least I only see rare moments of exchange between the editorial teams and the people with the new skills of storing, analyzing data, and so on, cleaning it, making sure the web technology is working smoothly. I'm curious, how many journalists are here in the room now? So 3, at least we have 3. It's great, but it does kind of prove my point. Now, let me try to explain why we shouldn't be putting up these new walls. About 1.5 years ago, Marcel Blattner, who you heard this morning, and Tim Nonner, who you'll hear right after my talk, we sat down together to discuss data-driven approaches for journalistic stories. And Marcel presented this briefly this morning. We came up with the idea of working with reader-generated comments on all of the many online news outlets Tamedia has. We wanted to come up with a better way of displaying and navigating user comments than just displaying them chronologically. We called this project Comment View. We applied for Google funding, which we luckily received, and since then we've been working on this project collaboratively. We split the project into 2 sections. Firstly, we wanted to create a technology to help the teams moderating our comment sections. We wanted to make them sift through the comments quicker, be more efficient in the way they work with the comments. And secondly, we wanted to analyze the comments we actually publish on our sites more deeply and provide readers with visual tools and filters to find the comments they are actually more interested in. I won't be talking about this second part in any more detail. I want to focus on the first part, the automatic inquiry into whether a comment is toxic or whether it's not toxic. Now, Marcel played around with various techniques, some quite elaborate techniques, and he still is doing that, as you saw this morning. But one of his very simple early ideas was simply counting the amount of times a word appeared in the toxic comments and comparing it to the amount of times words appeared in the non-toxic comments. Now, with this technique, you could basically work out whether a word is used more in the context of hate speech, the comments that were published, or not, by dividing one value count by the other one. So if a value is under 1, this means that its occurrence appears more in a positive context. If the value is above 1, the net context is more negative. So look at this beautifully Pythonic, short and concise code. I realize a lot of you might seem quite banal, but it just works so beautifully. By taking the ratings of these words into account, allows us to make a prediction on whether the comment contains hate speech or whether it does not. So Marcel calls me up one day in January and says that his results are quite good. On a side note, when Marcel says quite good, what he really means is really great. Considering his chronic habit of understatement, I'm pretty sure Marcel has something British about him, his ancestors. Here's the classifier if you want to play around with it. There's a lot more going on here than just counting, of course, but it's worth just taking a comment from the Tagesanzeiger to see what it comes up with. So we meet here in the canteen, and Marcel runs me through what he has done. And I asked him, so basically, we can determine how negative or positively charged the vocabulary of our readers is. And that's right, he says. We can create a list of all the words the readers have used, minus all the unimportant words, of course, and we can rate these words. So what we're basically doing is making a very long list of how negative and how positive our readers' language is. So these were the most negatively charged terms. You can kind of guess where these are coming from, what the environment is that these words are used. So I asked him, how about we only rate names? How about we only rate the names of our Bundesräte, our ministers, politicians, nations? That way we could see which Bundesrat is the one that is most negatively charged. Why not? Marcel replied, and he suggested not to use the whole available 7 million comments that we have, but just to focus on a very specific time frame to consider the topic shift. It's because over time, depending on current political affairs topics or different words get used more, and different words get emotionally charged. So depending on how large you make the time frame, the results will differ quite considerably. So that we basically focused on 200,000 comments from Newsnet sites. That involves the Tagesanzeiger, the Berner Zeitung, the Bund, the Basler Zeitung. 200,000 comments that had been published and 500,000 comments that hadn't been published. At this point, I could take over. The data size is more handleable for me, and the beautifully simple code had already been written. All I had to do is pick out the words and names I was looking for and search for them. So firstly, I looked at the politicians in Parliament that were mentioned. The list wasn't that interesting, as a lot of names are quite generic, so I can't really be sure if the comment is actually referring to the mentioned politician or not. So then I looked at the nationalities. Also, not great surprises. I was interested. Found it quite fascinating that the Vatican appeared so negatively charged, up there with Eritrea, Haiti, Albania. But basically no surprises, really. Is there a story here? Maybe if you looked over time, that could be a story that you could tell. But finally, we looked at the Bundesräte, and this is the list we came up with. You can see that, Marcel mentioned it again this morning, that Bundesrätin Simonetta Sommaruga receives so much more hate speech than her male colleagues. That's what this figure basically tells you. And three of them are actually slightly positively charged even. It doesn't mean, it just basically means that these guys are receiving less hate speech. It could be being criticized, but in a more moderate fashion than the Sommaruga, Amann, and Leuthardt. So basically, we could work out with this headline, Hass im Internet, Sommaruga ist am stärksten betroffen. You can, of course, argue that this too is not so surprising, but to have quantified the hate speech against female politicians has given this discussion, which is a discussion that's going on in the whole of Switzerland, a very new quality. And a few days later, after our publication, the Swiss television actually ran a 2-hour-long discussion basically using the simple code Marcel had developed as the anchor of the whole program, just because we had quantified the hate speech targeted at female politicians. Before I finish, let's give you another very simple example of just what pretty small, minor data collections can do and how interesting they are and the stories they can tell. Last autumn, Melanie, the Switzerland's Reporting and Analysis Center for Information Assurance, pushed the horrific news that 80,000 accounts of Swiss online services had been hacked and that usernames and passwords were floating around the net. It turned out that they had been for several years, and that the service was dvdshop.ch, which has closed since, so not that breaking news. And somebody from within Tamedia actually pointed me towards the hacker forum to download these 80,000 accounts. I won't mention any names, but thanks again. Now, the data itself looked very boring, around 73,000 emails with clear text passwords to a DVD shop that has since been closed. But again, querying the data, once again, from a gender perspective, produced some fascinating results. Firstly, I filtered out the emails that consisted of the classic formula, first name, last name, at whatever service it is. This applied to around about 60% of the accounts. Then I used the first name to determine the sex of the users, and in about 2% of the cases this wasn't possible. So this excluded another 840 values. So leaving around 41,000 accounts classified by gender. Now, I looked at the patterns of the male use of passwords, and this is the illustration we could come up with. And basically, you can see that so many stereotypes were confirmed. Men like using common use of expensive car brands, a very sexually connotated language. Females are more romantic. The language is more tender. But there are also some surprising findings as well. A certain group of women seem to use scatology in their passwords, so German Fäkalsprache, which also I found fascinating. It's not a fact that will change the world, I admit, but it's something you can work with for a very interesting read, and we did achieve quite a large readership for this on our online sites. As I said at the beginning, this talk is much a presentation as it is a request. So let me just leave you with the following message. If you do develop some beautiful code to query an interesting data set, or you stumble across some surprising fact or confirming insight during your work, and you reckon it might have a journalistic angle to explore and contribute to an ongoing debate, please reach out to me or anybody else within the editorial staff. Maybe your data suggests users are beginning to use Doodle in a new way. Maybe Ricardo users in a certain region are buying musical instruments a lot. What's up there? Maybe HomeGate data shows a surge of one-room flats in a specific area. Now, there might be interesting stories behind all of these facts that I've just invented. There's only really one major rule you should follow if you do reach out to journalists. If your main intent is to market your platform or your idea, then it's best to leave it. However, if you believe whatever you found is so interesting or revealing, or you want to share it with the rest of the world, you're not telling any company secrets, of course, then please don't hesitate to get in touch. Let's leave the walls we have where they are, the ones between the journalists and the ad department. They are good walls. But let us not build new walls, because between the editorial department and the new exciting jobs that are being created in areas like product development and digital sales or data science. Thanks a lot, dear colleagues, for your attention.